Echoes. Chapter 1. The Arrival. John Hawthorne never felt truly at home anywhere until he stepped inside the grand yet dilapidated mansion left to him by his late uncle. It stood as a lonely sentinel on the outskirts of a small, fog-laden town, its time-worn stones and overgrown garden telling tales of better days long past. Despite its state of disrepair, John was immediately drawn to it, a pull that went beyond mere inheritance or the allure of solitude. Upon his arrival, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if it had been waiting for him. The heavy front door groaned open, revealing rooms shrouded in dust and draped in shadows that slunk away from the late afternoon sunlight, filtering in through dirty windows. As he explored, the floorboards creaked underfoot, whispering secrets of the countless footsteps they had borne. The first few nights were restless. Sounds that had no source echoed through the halls, faint whispers, the clatter of something distant. John tried to dismiss these as the natural settling of an old house, yet a part of him couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Each corner he turned seemed to hold a breath held too long, releasing only when he passed. It was during a chilly evening, while he sat reading by the fireplace, that John first felt the unmistakable sensation of a cold draught that meandered through the room like a curious animal. He followed it from one room to another, tracing its path until it disappeared as abruptly as it had appeared. That night, shadows in his peripheral vision seemed to flicker and dance, forming shapes that dissolved when he dared to look directly at them. The old house, with all its eccentricities, quickly became an enigma that John was compelled to solve. He felt an inexplicable connection, a bond formed not just by blood and heritage, but by something deeper, more esoteric. As days turned into weeks, the house's peculiarities became more pronounced, more personal. It was as if the building knew him, as if it recognized him as one of its own. Chapter 2. The Haunting. As the initial charm of the mansion waned, the peculiarities John had once found quaint began to take on a more sinister tone. It started with the mirrors. John noticed that sometimes, when he passed by them, there would be a delay before his reflection followed. The first few times, he shrugged it off as a trick of the light, or his own tired mind playing games. But then, the reflections began to show things that weren't there, or rather, things that shouldn't be there. One evening, as dusk crept across the land, John was straightening a portrait in the hallway when he caught sight of a figure standing behind him in the reflection of the window. He spun around, his heart racing, but there was no one there. When he looked back at the glass, the figure was gone. This was not the only instance. Shadows seemed to linger in the corners of his vision, flickering at the edges of the tall antique mirrors, hinting at forms and faces that vanished when he tried to focus on them. The photographs of his family began to fall off the walls, at first randomly, then, it seemed, with intent. The glass would shatter across the floor, the faces of his ancestors looking up at him from amidst the fragments, with eyes full of something akin to warning. Then there were the doors that would close softly, as if pushed by a considerate visitor who wished not to disturb. This would have been easy enough to ignore if it weren't for the fact that it happened even when there was no wind, when the house was so still that the silence itself seemed a solid thing. One night, compelled by a mixture of dread and determination, John decided to confront whatever haunted his new home. He stayed up, sitting in the darkened living room, waiting. Just after midnight, the temperature dropped sharply. The air grew thick, almost suffocating. The shadows deepened, coalescing into the figure of a woman. She was dressed in Victorian garb, her face pale and drawn, her eyes hollow pits of despair. She reached out to him, mouth moving as if speaking, yet no sound came out. Frightened, yet fascinated, John found himself drawn to her. Night after night, she appeared, each time clearer, more distinct. He realized she was trying to communicate with him, her gestures desperate and pleading. Something about her felt painfully familiar, though he couldn't quite place what it was. Determined to uncover the truth, John began to search the house for clues. He rummaged through old boxes, dusty trunks and bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that crumbled at his touch. It was in the attic, under the eaves, that he found his first clue, a series of journals written by his great-grandfather, which mentioned the woman by name, Elizabeth. She had been his wife, and her sudden disappearance had been a dark cloud over the family ever since. Chapter 3. The Revelation. John delved deeper into the journals he had discovered, reading by the flicker of candlelight in the dusty, cobwebbed attic. Each entry provided a fragment of Elizabeth's life and the ominous undercurrents that seemed to pervade it. The more he read, the more John felt a strange overlap between his existence and the stories etched in the faded ink of his great-grandfather's handwriting. The journal entries began to reveal a tale of mistrust and jealousy. Elizabeth, described as a vibrant yet deeply melancholic woman, had feared for her life. She wrote of being watched by unseen eyes and hearing whispers in the night, mirroring John's own experiences since arriving at the mansion. The entries grew more erratic towards the end, hinting at an unspeakable deed that had been contemplated, if not committed. Driven by an inexplicable sense of duty to uncover the truth, John started to investigate the house's structure, looking for any physical evidence that might corroborate the haunting narratives from the journals. His search led him to a hidden passage behind a false wall in the library, a passage that twisted down into the dark bowels of the mansion. Descending with nothing but a lantern, John discovered a sealed room. The air was thick with the mustiness of decay, and as he pried open the door, a chill swept through, stirring the dust into ghostly swirls. Inside, he found a well-preserved Victorian bedroom, untouched except for layers of dust. There, portraits of Elizabeth adorned the walls, her eyes seeming to follow him around the room. At the center of this forgotten sanctum was a diary, Elizabeth's own. Its pages were filled with fearful entries and final, frantic scribbles that confirmed John's worst suspicions. She had known her life was in danger from her own husband, John's great-grandfather, who believed she harbored dark secrets. The last entry was a goodbye, written on the night she vanished. Chapter 4. The Echo. The weight of the discovery bore down on John as he sat in the hidden room, Elizabeth's diary in hand. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows that danced around the room. As he read the last of her entries, the temperature dropped sharply. He looked up to see Elizabeth's apparition before him, clearer than ever, her expression sorrowful. She pointed towards the floorboards beneath her portrait. Hesitantly, John moved to where she directed and found a loose board. Pulling it away, he revealed a small cavity containing a rusted key and a folded piece of parchment, a map leading to the old well on the outskirts of the property, long sealed and forgotten. Armed with a new resolve, John ventured out into the misty night, following the map's directions to the ancient well. The air grew colder as he approached, and the ground was soggy, the grass around the well unnaturally lush. He used the key to open the heavy iron padlock that secured the well's lid. As the lid creaked open, a rush of cold air escaped, carrying with it a whirlwind of whispers, voices of the past, pleading for recognition. Peering inside, John didn't see water, but a deep darkness that seemed to stare back at him. Then, the ghost of Elizabeth appeared once more, pointing into the abyss. Compelled by a force he couldn't resist, John climbed into the well. As he descended, the stone walls seemed to close in around him, and the whispers grew louder. When he reached the bottom, he found not water, but a solid floor. And there, in the dim light, he saw not his own reflection, but that of his great-grandfather, looking back at him with a twisted grimace of guilt and torment. In that moment, the truth hit him like a physical blow. He had been reliving his great-grandfather's life, his guilt, and his secrets. The realization shattered the barrier between past and present, revealing that John was the echo of the man he feared most. He was the ghost, cursed to haunt the place of his own grim deeds, reliving them until he acknowledged the truth. With this revelation, Elizabeth's spirit seemed to find peace, her form dissolving into the light as dawn broke. John, now fully aware of his spectral existence, felt the weight of his ancestral sins lift. As the sun's first rays illuminated the well, he felt himself fading, ready to move on. His haunting finally ended. In accepting his fate, John freed not only Elizabeth, but himself, bringing peace to the troubled mansion at last.